Muammar Gaddafi had to go. In this video, we'll be exploring this topic in more detail and examining the case of Muammar Gaddafi and his impact on international security. Many people give the United States an unfair deal when it comes to foreign affairs. It's no secret that many people accuse the United States of being imperialist and meddling in the affairs of other countries. However, these accusations fail to recognize the fact that the U.S. is simply trying to ensure that international law is respected and followed. By being an advocate and enforcer of international law, the U.S. is helping to create a safer and more stable world for everyone. Although Muammar Gaddafi may have been a great leader, Muammar Gaddafi was a controversial figure who had a complex relationship with the U.S. While some argue that he did good as a leader by investing in infrastructure and education, others point to his brutal crackdowns on dissent and human rights abuses.
Psychotic, to the point that the U.S. government considered him the most dangerous man in the world.
One of the reasons why Gaddafi became a major concern for U.S. national security was his repeated attempts to force the world to enforce international law. Gaddafi was known for supporting terrorist organizations and interfering in the affairs of other countries, which ultimately made him a major threat to global stability. In the early months of 2011, a wave of popular uprisings known as the Arab Spring swept across the Middle East and North Africa. Libya, under the autocratic rule of Muammar Gaddafi for over 4 decades, was no exception. The Libyan people, long oppressed and yearning for change, were about to embark on a journey that would reshape their nation's history. The Arab Spring refers to a series of popular uprisings and protests that swept across several countries in the Middle East and North Africa region, starting in late 2010 and continuing into 2011 and beyond. The Arab Spring was characterized by widespread calls for political reform, social justice, economic opportunities, and an end to corruption and authoritarian rule. It was primarily driven by young people and grassroots movements who utilized social media and online platforms to mobilize and coordinate protests. The spark that ignited the Arab Spring was the self-immolation of a street vendor named Mohamed Bouazizi in Tunisia in December 2010. Bouazizi worked as a fruit and vegetable seller in the city of Sidi Bouzid, Tunisia. He was a young man trying to make a living to support his family. Like many street vendors in Tunisia, Bouazizi faced constant harassment and extortion by local authorities. On December 17, 2010, his cart of goods was confiscated by the police due to his inability to pay bribes. Feeling humiliated and desperate, Bouazizi went to a government office to seek justice for his confiscated cart, but was met with indifference and disrespect. In a final act of protest and desperation, he set himself on fire outside the office. Bouazizi's desperate act of protest against government harassment and corruption struck a chord with people across the region, and his death became a symbol of the frustrations and grievances experienced by many.
Police delivered the body to the family for burial under tight security, afraid news of his death would only fuel the uprising even more.
When we wanted to bury him, we wanted to carry his body in front of the municipal building where he burnt himself. The police wouldn't let us. They told us to take his body through a place nobody would see us.
The protests quickly spread from Tunisia to other countries, including Egypt, Libya, Yemen, Syria, Bahrain, and others. Each country's uprising had its unique dynamics, but common themes included demands for political freedom, democracy, human rights, and economic opportunities. The Arab Spring led to significant political changes in some countries. In Tunisia, President Zine El Abidine Ben Ali was forced to step down in January 2011, marking the first major success of the movement. In Egypt, massive demonstrations eventually led to the resignation of President Hosni Mubarak after nearly 30 years in power. However, the outcomes of the Arab Spring varied across different countries. Some nations experienced violent and protracted conflicts, such as Libya and Syria, which led to widespread instability and humanitarian crises. Other countries, like Bahrain and Saudi Arabia, managed to suppress the protests and maintain the status quo. The dissatisfaction with Gaddafi's regime had been brewing for years. His authoritarian rule, characterized by corruption, human rights abuses, and economic mismanagement, had left the Libyan people disillusioned and deprived of basic freedoms. Inspired by the successful uprisings in Tunisia and Egypt, Libyan dissidents, both within the country and in exile, began mobilizing to challenge Gaddafi's grip on power. Social media platforms and the internet played a crucial role in organizing and spreading the message of resistance. Activists used online platforms to coordinate protests, share information, and expose the realities of life under Gaddafi's regime to a global audience. Gaddafi, refusing to relinquish his grip on power, responded with brutal force. Security forces loyal to the regime unleashed violence on the protesters, employing live ammunition, tear gas, and even heavy weaponry against unarmed civilians. The situation escalated rapidly, and as the violence intensified, thousands of Libyans sought refuge in neighboring countries. The international community, alarmed by the scale of the violence, began voicing their concerns and considering potential interventions. In March 2011, the United Nations Security Council passed Resolution 1973, authorizing the implementation of a no-fly zone over Libya and the use of all necessary measures to protect civilians. This marked the beginning of a military intervention by international forces, led by NATO. The months that followed witnessed intense battles between opposition forces and loyalists. Despite facing a heavily armed regime, the Libyan rebels displayed resilience and determination, gradually gaining ground and capturing key cities. On October 20, 2011, after months of conflict, rebel fighters finally captured Gaddafi in his hometown of Sirte. The situation reached a turning point when Gaddafi's convoy attempting to flee his hometown of Sirte was intercepted by opposition fighters. According to some reports, a NATO airstrike targeted the convoy, damaging the vehicles and forcing Gaddafi to take refuge in a nearby drainage pipe. Opposition fighters who had been closely pursuing the convoy soon discovered Gaddafi's hiding place. Videos and images captured at the scene showed Gaddafi bloodied and disoriented, with disheveled hair and a look of disbelief. The circumstances of Gaddafi's capture quickly circulated globally, marking a symbolic moment in the conflict and signaling the imminent end of his rule. Following his capture, Gaddafi was taken into custody by the opposition fighters. The images of a bloodied and captured Gaddafi spread across the world, marking the end of his tyrannical rule. On October 20, 2011, Muammar Gaddafi succumbed to his injuries and died while in the custody of the opposition forces. Muammar Gaddafi had to go. From the early days of his rule to the uprising that eventually led to his downfall, we witnessed a reign characterized by authoritarianism, human rights abuses, corruption, and economic mismanagement. Gaddafi's regime suppressed political dissent, stifled freedom of expression, and denied basic rights to the Libyan people. The oppressive nature of his rule created a climate of fear and repression, leaving the population voiceless and unable to shape their own destinies. Moreover, Gaddafi's policies of economic centralization and mismanagement led to widespread poverty, unemployment, and inequality. Despite Libya's vast oil wealth, the benefits were not evenly distributed among the population, exacerbating social grievances and frustrations. As we reflect on the story of Muammar Gaddafi and the events that unfolded, let us remember the importance of safeguarding the values of freedom, democracy, and human rights. May this documentary inspire continued efforts to build societies where the voices of the people are heard and where leaders are held accountable for their actions. See you next time.